Well, my name is Kent Gray. I'm a lawyer here in Springfield, born and raised in Springfield area, I should say, not in the city of Springfield. The only time I actually lived in Springfield is I think when I was born at Memorial Medical Center. But since then, lived out in the unincorporated area of Woodside Township and then moved to Leland Grove about 11 years ago. But consider myself a Springfield area resident all my life. Been an elected official for 15 years on the Lincoln Land Community College Board. I ran for that at 29. Actually, I asked to run for it at 27 and got told no by the party because they had a different plan. And I came back at 29 and they thought I couldn't win, and so I ran and I won. And I've been on that board now so long that I'm the longest serving, continuously serving member at 15 years, which is kind of funny to start at 29 and end up in your 40s on a community college board. I am married, have two kids, two boys that go to school here in Springfield, and been involved in politics for a long time, but also in public policy, and just generally pro-Springfield area issues. Been involved in the Bar Association projects, been involved in historical projects, been involved in the ALPLM, and have a wide range of experiences over the last 20 years especially around the world in political and governmental issues. And there's a judgeship open this time, which rarely ever happens. I don't think we've had a open judgeship for 21 years. When I was a student at Lincoln Land and when George Herbert Walker Bush was President of the United States. And somebody said, well, why run this time? And I said, because if the current schedule holds, I'd be 65 when it comes up again, so I probably ought to throw my name in the hat. This was kind of unexpected. You know, the history around Sangamon County is that these judgeships get appointed, and the person sits in it for approximately 2 years, and then they run as the incumbent judge a couple years later. And that's happened at least 4 of the last 6 times, and a couple times before that, going back into the 90s. I think there were a couple candidates that, the Democrats especially, that were able to win in a contested race. We haven't had primaries for a very, very long time, and this was a situation where the Supreme Court certified this to the ballot in the middle of the filing period with only about 6 weeks to go. And I spent 7 years in one of the largest firms in Springfield, 7 years as a solo practitioner, and I looked at kind of the situation that I found myself in my career, and I thought, you know, running for a judgeship might both be rewarding, entertaining from a political standpoint of being a candidate for office again, and a great job and career move for me.
So you've been an attorney for, is that 14 years?
Not quite 14. It would be more like upper 12 or low 13.
Okay.
It depends on how you count it. You know, I started with Giffen winning the second year of law school. And so you can do legal stuff as long as you are kind of managed by a partner in a law firm, but you don't have your law license yet. So there's a delay there as you go through that. It's kind of a hangover from the guilds.
And what kind of law did you and do you practice?
Well, I do a pretty wide variety of things. I graduated with the honor at St. Louis University of an employment law certificate, which is one of the 3 kind of programs that they have which are above and beyond the usual law degree. And different law schools around the country have different certifications. So I do a lot of employment law. I do a lot of governmental and municipal law. When I was at Giffen Winning, I did a lot of legislative type law, which actually goes back to when I was on both House and Senate staff, and really also on the staff of the state comptroller, because I did a lot of her legislative stuff. So I was kind of doing legal related issues. For instance, I was involved in writing laws before I ever became a lawyer, and then became a lawyer and realized why some of those laws ended up getting thrown out as unconstitutional down the road.
That was Lolita Dietrichson you worked with?
Yeah.
Were you on full-time staff?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. I was her executive assistant. I was executive assistant to the comptroller for a little under 3 years.
Okay. Judge candidates often talk about courtroom experience, so how often are you in court, or has that been a big part of your practice?
Oh yeah, I mean, I don't think any lawyer is in court as much as they might have used to have been back in the day. But I'm in court. I mean, I'm in court probably every couple of weeks on something. I mean, it might be a collection case, it might be an employment case. I had a pretty significant DUI case that I defended somebody on this year. You know, when I was at Giffen, a lot of times I would go over and do whatever. We were more of a corporate type law firm, but you have situations where employees or family members or clients get in trouble, and so I would go over and do either felony or misdemeanor, usually plea bargain type stuff, because that's the vast majority of what happens of the 50,000+ cases in Sangamon County.
You mentioned being on staff, so it was on Republican staff, right? And I know you've worked for, advanced work for Dole and Bush and Sarah and all kinds of folks. How do you match up your being a strong partisan with the fact that a judge is supposed to be fair to everybody?
Well, I think those that know me well know that I have been historically fair to everyone. I think the best, if you want to really look into that, I think the best way to look at that is the 9 years I spent on the Springfield Civil Service Commission, which is an administrative body that does adjudicate cases. So it is the administrative body that deals with the 1,800 or so employees at the city of Springfield. I am a strong Republican, but I will tell you that everybody over in the courthouse is either a Republican or a Democrat, or in the case of some people like my opponent, both a Republican and a Democrat. So in Springfield you would call that a Republicrat, which there are around this town.
And that is because of what?
Well, he has a history of being a major donor to Democratic candidates.
That's just Tim Davlin, right?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. But
okay, that's fine.
But if you look around, you notice there's no Democrat running this year on the judge race. And if you look around, you'll see former Democratic county chairmen who have my opponent's signs in their yards. So there is.
Who's got it, Timony?
I'm not going to get into particular names. You guys have people that drive around the city. You guys can figure that out. My point is, this is Springfield, and we all know that the political reality is sometimes the fix is in this town. And this particular year in the primary, the fix is not necessarily in.
You, by the way, challenged Mr. Madonia's petitions, Judge Madonia's petitions, and you have now appealed the 8-0 decision by the State Board of Elections in his favor to court, and Judge Graves is assigned. Do you know when a hearing is set?
I don't know that I didn't see that Judge Graves was assigned the last time I checked it. Judge Schmidt had gotten it.
Oh, okay.
But maybe they have changed it. I noticed that
I might have misread
my opponent was traveling with Judge Schmidt the other night at a Republican event down in Jersey County. So I'm assuming between all the judges over there who have given either disclosable donations that show up on his reports, or some of them have told me they've given less than disclosable donations that have shown up on his reports, and then those of them who are supporting him politically, I would assume that narrows the number of judges over there who are in a position to be able to hear this.
You don't know the time for a hearing at this point. Okay.
No.
What's your sentencing philosophy? Because there's been a lot of, we have more people in prison per capita, I think, in America than in many countries. And a lot of that is based on law, but there is some discretion.
There is discretion, and this was an interesting issue. This came up a lot. I also ran for state's attorney in 2004, and that was a particular year where I ran in Christian County, not Sangamon County. In Illinois, you don't have to be a resident of the particular county to run for state's attorney. It's one of the unusual races like that. We had a situation in Christian County where that is in a different Supreme Court district, and Judge Lloyd Carmeier was running. Well, he was justice at the time. The appellate court was running for Supreme Court justice, and the party was very interested in trying to get him elected because Republicans had never held that Southern Illinois Supreme Court race, and so John Shimkus at the time and Rodney Davis asked me to get involved and run for that race, with the knowledge that coming from a different county, it would be a challenging race, and it ended up being an interesting race after my opponent got in a DUI hit and run. But that was a big issue that came up in the state's attorney race, and of course meth was just exploding at the time in the early to mid 2000s. I was just out in Seattle, and I was walking down the street, and there was a whole gaggle of folks just sitting around smoking dope on the corner of one of the streets in downtown Seattle. I haven't been to Colorado for a number of years, but I'm sure it's even crazier there now that they've decriminalized a lot of stuff. On one hand, I think it's probably a mistake to have too many folks in prison for what are nonviolent acts when it impinges on the ability to have folks who really are violent to their neighbors and loved ones unable to be in prison because there's not space. That concerns me. And I think we have used too much incarceration. But that being said, the vast majority of it, frankly, is now in statute because legislators have gotten tired of judges who, in their view, are not very stringent in enforcing sentencing. And so there's a lot of mandatory minimums, especially on the federal level, which is not what this judgeship is, but the federal level is very severe on that. There's not a lot of leeway anyway that you can go. And my general view was, in the state's attorney race, I would get these folks that would tell me, well, you just still have a lot of stuff you can't even prosecute because there just won't be room for them in the jail or there won't be room for them in the prisons. At the end of the day, I think the prosecutors have to decide what's important to prosecute and not worry about what the jail space is. I think the judges need to understand that they need to be fair across all the sentencing, because why should somebody who was sentenced in 2013 when there's space in the jail go to jail for 60 days, and why should somebody in 2015 when maybe the jail is full or overcrowded that they can't fit in? There's a lot of ripples that are causing problems in this sentencing issue, which I think are really problematic. And then you have the corrections folks that at the end of the day, they're charged with housing it, and it's frankly up to the legislature and the governor to come up with the resources that are needed to affect these sentencing guidelines. If the legislature and the governor are going to sign guidelines, then they need to provide the space to have the housing for prisoners.
Okay. Medical marijuana is now legal in Illinois. Are you able to opine on that? Is that a good idea?
I think probably that's one of those areas that will fall into the case or controversy that might come down the pike, just because there's going to be contours of that law that need to be settled out. And so I think there's nothing that I've seen that really, that's what the legislature chose to do. They're the elected representatives of the people. And over probably the next 10 years or so, a lot of the little, like I said, the contours of how that law is put in place will find its way through the courts.
I could just try to see if you have an opinion on legalization of marijuana in general.
Well, that's what the legislature has partially done in Illinois. It's what the legislature has done in other states, and I think that is the proper role of the legislature to decide those issues. I don't smoke marijuana, so it doesn't affect me at all, medically or otherwise.
In your introduction, and I'm sorry to be this way, but you mentioned you're married, a couple of kids, but your wife has filed for divorce. We've written about it.
Oh, yes,
she basically, I don't think she got the financial restraining order to keep you from selling some of your presidential Christmas cards or memorabilia, but she had filed for it. She says you're a bad money manager. You told me you're a couple $100,000 in debt for college loans. So you really kind of have a stressful family situation right now and financial situation, and I know you are also, for some legal reason, not paying the property taxes on the house where she's still living. So isn't this a bad time to run for judge?
Well,
or does this reflect in any way on kind of a tumultuous time that might be better to pay attention to those things?
Well, my wife filed for divorce back in June of 2013. Much of what you wrote about in your article are from the initial pleadings. There's been very little since then that has come up that's been of any, serious consequences one way or the other. I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about my divorce because I think there are a lot of people in public life that have issues of divorce. I mean, you touched upon it with Ann Callis the other day and her 3 marriages. Are you going to go back and pull all her divorce records and run stories about what happened on 1 and 2 and 3 and the judge that I'm seeking to replace? I just don't think people come up to me and say they don't really care about much of that stuff. Now, if there were police records that said I had hurt my wife or hurt my children or was an alcoholic or on drugs or any of these other issues that were that are serious problems, that's a different issue. But in this case, you have 2 people that after a pretty decent length of marriage and relationship have just grown apart and gone different directions. Stress-wise, while I'd like to have my kids with me more days than I do, I have them about roughly half the time. And actually, I think we've been doing very well. The kids have been doing well, and we get along. So.
Let's see. By the way, is the property tax thing still up in the air?
Nope.
Oh, you got it paid?
Yep.
Okay. And let's see. Oh, you just put your name in just the last few weeks to be a GOP on the Republican National Committee from Illinois, National Committeeman. 5 people applied. You did not end up getting it. Was it your thought that you could be a judge and the GOP National Committeeman at the same time?
Well, in researching it, it's been interesting. Over the last 30 years that I've been involved in politics, you've seen a great deal of relaxation in political involvement of judges. when I first got involved in politics back in the early 80s, you never saw judges at fundraisers, you never saw judges at anything, even though they were elected, you know. Since that time, there have been a number of issues in the ABA rules on relaxing the involvement of judges in political issues. There's also been, the state of Illinois has a statutory provision now that says that no political office is incompatible with any other office of the state of Illinois, which would be one of the judgeships, which is a statutory, which of course is above the Supreme Court rules. And then there was a case that came down in 2002 that Justice Scalia of the U.S. Supreme Court opined in. And that case basically threw out a lot of the First Amendment restrictions that Minnesota had under the model ABA rules on being involved in political and making comments on issues. And so, as I look through all of this, and it's horrible that Rich Williamson died at such a young age, but, I was involved 4 years ago when that vacancy opened up and Rich Williamson got it. There was nobody else from downstate Illinois that I
You mean
understand.
20 years ago?
No, 4 years ago.
Oh, 4. Okay,
Yeah.
4. I thought you said 40.
Maybe 3.5 years ago,
Okay. Sorry.
but 2009 or 2010, I can't remember when it was. It was when Pat Brady moved up to become state Republican chairman. It opened up his national committeeman spot, and Rich Williamson and Bob Schillerstrom, myself, Jack Roser, a number of others. There was about 11 of us that put our names in. And this particular time, I actually was not going to do it. There wasn't anybody else from downstate Illinois who was going to put their name in. One of the state central committeemen, this time around you had to be nominated essentially by a state central committeeman to be one of the considered. And I had a state central committeeman who wanted me to put my name in, nominated me. We were pretty sure where the votes were going to fall because the Richard Porter, who's a great guy from northern end of Chicago, pretty much had the votes locked up before we even got to Chicago. But I figured I'd give it a try. And again, it's one of those things. The timing is, of course, not good, but of course the timing is because we lost a good friend in Rich Williamson. So what can you say? It is unfortunately what it is. But there are different levels for candidates and judges, and so I think the issue was going to be whether or not you could be a candidate and be a national committeeman. Well, we would find out whether or not I'm still a candidate for judge in the middle of March. And then the judicial actually being sworn in won't happen until December. So that's kind of what we looked at.
Why are you better than Judge Madonia for this?
Well, I think, my history of being an elected official for 15 years, I think I bring a lot to it. I've run for office. This is my 14th run for office in my life. I've really only lost once and learned a lot of lessons from that loss.
Which one was that?
The state's attorney in Christian County.
Okay. Weren't you a state senate candidate for a while?
Well, I didn't lose. I didn't really even get into that race. I got told no before I got started, basically.
That's when you donated $92,000 to yourself and then took it out a month later when you got out of the race.
Yeah, that happens.
Okay. Anyway.
Anyway, I think my history of being involved here in Springfield, I think I have a wide range of involvement in issues that impact Springfield citizens. I think I've had a great deal of experience from the 9 years I spent on the Springfield Civil Service Commission dealing with a lot of those issues. Those were some major, I basically joined that commission about a year and a half after the Renata Frazier case. And, immediately we were into the issue of the banding. And, even as a Republican from Chatham, at the end of the day, I sided with the NAACP, and we were working together on that particular issue. When Ralph Harris was up for the sergeant lieutenant position, I can't remember which one it was, at the time, the city of Springfield made a point to try to get rid of that list so that he would not get promoted and have to reapply, basically. I was heavily involved in getting a group of folks together on that commission, which were not a majority of Republicans because Tim Davlin was the mayor. And we were able to extend that list and allow him to get promoted because I really did at the time. And I really was convinced that they were not giving it to him because he was African American. I jumped into the issue with the noose situation at CWLP, and your coverage might reflect that somewhere, but the whole issue of why those folks got such little discipline at the time, discipline, frankly, in a manner that had never been done in the city of Springfield before, and giving the ringleaders the 60-day discipline so that they wouldn't have to get terminated, and you had the friendships and relationships that go on there. Those are issues where, frankly, the people that I was trying to help out that I thought deserved to have a voice in the whole process were probably not Republicans, and I frankly didn't care. I have a lot of clients who are not Republicans. I have clients who are Democrats. I have clients I never know whether they're Republican or Democrat. So I think a lot of people consider me, if they know me, they consider me very partisan. But I think if you look at the broadness of my life, I don't apply that in any way to the relationships I have or the work that I do or how I handle cases. In fact, I think some of the comments that I've gotten over the years from people, from the head of the NAACP to other folks that basically said, wow, I'm really impressed that you took that issue on. And I think you can be someone other than just a Republican or just a Democrat or whatever it is, and you can still have an impartiality that goes on in that. I think the other fact is in Sangamon County in the courthouse, there's 50-some thousand cases that go through there a year. I can't believe more than a couple dozen of them even have a political tinge to them. I mean, in the vast majority, they are, they're personal injury cases, and they're.
Well, the question was, why are you better than the current sitting judge?
I think the fact that I've got a Master's of Business Administration. Right now, we don't have a single judge in the Sangamon County Courthouse, the circuit judges, the 6 circuits that are there, that has advanced master's degree. They all have a history coming out of the prosecution side of things, which is fine. I mean, a judge's caseload is approximately half criminal, depending on what's going on in a given year. And I think it's important to have a broader set of skills brought to the bench in Sangamon County. If everybody is a former prosecutor, then everybody has the possibility of coming in and saying somebody's guilty in this courtroom. And the reality is, most of the cases that circuit judges see don't have anything to do with guilt or innocence. It's 2 parties that have a dispute between them, and you're just trying to make for a fair playing field for that to be adjudicated. I think people that know me know that I'm very fair, I'm very patient, I'm very tolerant. I am a conservative Republican, and I have been for 30 years, but I think everybody else over at the Sangamon County Courthouse is probably either a Republican or a Democrat in one way, shape, or form. I think people just identify me a little bit more as a partisan. But I think, the scope of my life that I've been involved in probably makes me a better candidate for being a judge. Now, that's nothing, I happen to like my opponent, and I'm in front of him from time to time in court, so I don't have any problems there. I would assume his argument will be, well, he's a sitting judge and he should be a judge. Well, I understand that, but keep in mind, there's no other judge that we've had in the last, I think, 20 or 25 or maybe 30 years who was ever an associate judge who moved on to be circuit judge. If you look at Judge Schmidt, Judge Kavanaugh, Judge Bells, Judge Kelly, Judge Cadigan, Judge Zappa, who this vacancy is, Graves, none of them were associate judges. Actually, I think Bob Eggers was an associate judge for a short period of time before he became circuit judge in the 1990s. So everybody there, and now, don't get me wrong, I mean, these are former state's attorneys. These are very experienced individuals, and there's no slight against them. But the reality is, none of them had worn the robe until they wore the robe. It is one of those jobs where there's probably no training that's exactly like it until you actually walk in that door one day and you get up on the bench.
You just mentioned the news case over at the city when you're on the Civil Service Commission, which I guess you lost because Mayor Houston decided if you lived in Leland Grove you couldn't be on it anymore, which you disagree with, right? But that's beside that.
Well, there's the Springfield Municipal Code allows for the city council to make a vote to allow somebody who doesn't live to sit on some of those boards, and I pointed that out to the mayor. Actually, I have a letter from Mayor Houston that talks about how I absolutely cannot be on the Springfield Civil Service Commission because we don't even understand how you could do it because you don't live in the city of Springfield, which I actually introduced as one of the exhibits in the petition objection cases when they argued that, of course, I don't live in Leland Grove, that I live in Springfield. Well, I don't live in Springfield. And I have a letter from the mayor of Springfield that says, you don't live in Springfield. And the look on the lawyer's face for my opponent was like, oh my God, who would have a letter from the mayor of a city saying, no, you don't live here. And so that was just a really funny, I'm like, I know I have a letter around here somewhere from Mayor Houston. I got to find that. But go ahead, Bernie, I'm sorry.
Anyway, what did you think that the people involved in that news situation did not get enough punishment, or what was your position on that?
Well, I think the way the Civil Service Commission, the way the civil service law in Illinois is written, and part of the problem is there's really only a handful of large enough communities in Illinois that fall under the civil service rules. There's a different set of rules for smaller communities. And so there's not a lot of guidance on how that goes. But my argument was that it was the Civil Service Commission's prerogative, if they wanted to get more involved in it, is basically to do an investigation. In fact, what I was kind of arguing for when that went down was kind of like this ombudsman or internal affairs type, folks at the council, Inspector General that the council's talking about. And if you read the act, it says that the Civil Service Commission can basically get involved. It's a separate, it is a separate organization, quote, from the city of Springfield. Now, I always had problems because the city of Springfield lawyer, of course, was our lawyer, but then he was the city's lawyer when he needed to be the city's lawyer. And, you had a lot of these hat sharing type stuff. But the reality was, I thought that was a situation that cried for somebody to get involved. You had the mayor who had family relations and longtime friendships with the two employees involved. You just needed somebody to come in there who was separate and distinct.
So you argued for that kind of investigation,
for that,
but you
yeah.
did not win the day with the
I
commission.
I lost that one horribly.
Nobody voted with you?
I don't know that. I think I might have made a motion and maybe it didn't even get a second. I can't remember. It was spectacularly bad on how that ended up burning out. But and then we went on. Not long after that, we had the pornography issue at CWLP, and I do a lot of employment law, and with Civil Service Commission, that's about 1,800 employees that I've dealt with over the years. On Lincoln Land at 15 years, that's about 900 employees. I would argue that over the years between my legal representation or my legal work as a lawyer, but also being on these two boards and commissions, we see everything that comes up of any importance in the human resources area. And that's, over 2,000, between 2,000 and 3,000 employees in the city of Springfield. So you see a lot of stories. There are a lot of stories I could tell you without naming names about what goes on in the city of Springfield that never made it into any of the news media in this
You
town.
should tell us.
I should, yeah, but I didn't. And so, when you look at all those issues, I think number one, I think it's a great skill set that I bring to the issue because you've had a lot of these stories. You always have these, well, he did this, he didn't do that, or whatever. But as a human resources person, at some point, sometimes when something goes wrong, somebody does need to be terminated. I mean, you have to fire somebody. I mean, it sends a message to everybody else and cleans up the issue. The pornography issue, basically, I don't think anybody got over 5 days suspension on that, and they did that purposely so it didn't go to the Civil Service Commission because there's a rule that unless they get a certain amount of discipline, it cannot go to the Civil Service Commission because we don't vest our jurisdiction. And I'm like, guys, you had people bring in dangerous code, essentially, on jump drives and put them into the power plant. And a couple of years ago, you had the power plant blow up. You got to enforce some of these issues. And so, maybe I'm a little bit hard-headed in some of those areas, but that was kind of the way I was at.
Cameras in the courtroom is an issue that's come up. It looks like it's going to move forward. What are your thoughts on that? Do you have concerns?
I do have concerns. I think I don't watch a lot of what I will call true crime TV or judicial TV, which a lot of states have a lot of coverage. I think I'm not saying I'm against it, and it's going to move forward. Frankly, it's probably a foregone conclusion at this point. But the unfortunate part of it is there are a lot of issues that are dealt with in the courtroom, whether it's divorce or kids or juveniles or whatever, that it's a lot harder to just to manage when those cameras are on and when things are being covered. So that concerns me greatly. And then also just the nature of news media, which is the soundbite or the clip or whatever it is. It's one thing to watch a trial all the way through on video and probably understand just as well as the jurors did of what was going on. It's another thing to get just a 5-second snippet on the nightly news or a quote, frankly, in the paper. It doesn't give you a lot of context in what was really going on. And, the best thing I can say about that, if you remember when Bush v. Gore came down in 2000, you had a bunch of reporters running out to fixed camera positions outside the Supreme Court, and you had them trying to read through the decision, and frankly, a lot of them getting it completely wrong. And the point is, it usually requires a little bit more thought and time to digest that before you can go on air and talk about it. And so I worry about how that might affect some of the folks, the participants in legal.
Well, circuit judges, they're family cases, they're not going to allow cameras in any way, and circuit judges have, I believe under the Illinois new system that they're trial, the circuit judge can decide if, are you saying that you would tend not to allow cameras in your court if you had an option, or? I
would probably tend to have less coverage. I guess I would I would err on the side of the participants in the particular case or controversy not having that broadcast if there's anything there that might affect their rights or whatever it is.
Okay, except, it used to be, when you didn't have to go through security, the public could go and watch court and sit in court. So, the big movement is, this is a 1/3 of our government, this branch. Why not let people see how it actually works so they don't have these mystical views? And really, with live streaming, or not live streaming, but with, internet sites, a lot more than sound bites now gets out there than used to in many ways.
That's true. And it's a situation where I haven't been a judge, so I haven't experienced a lot of that on how it ends. And you can have, I've had cases where I've been involved in where the case is sealed, so nobody could come in the back door and sit in that particular case, and that happens from time to time. But for instance, my divorce case, which everybody seems to think is so juicy, but really isn't, that's not sealed. Anybody can walk into that courtroom and listen to what's going on. And, those deal with issues of my children's medical issues and stuff like that. So there's a lot more there that's in open court, I think, than the average person thinks. Not every family case would be necessarily, there's still there's a lot more exposure in the courthouse to walk in and listen to what's going on than anything, other than maybe juvenile cases, some mental health issues,
When did you leave Giffen Winning?
2008.
Okay, and was that because what? Because you were spending too much time on the road with the political stuff, or what? Or what was the reason? Or?
No, I don't think so. Actually, we'd had a conversation a few months before that about me going to become. I was one of the 2 senior associates, and we had the discussion about me becoming a partner. And I had a discussion with them that I really didn't want to be a partner in the law firm, and that didn't go real well. And then, if you might recall, we had an issue involving, again, petition objections to candidates back then, with a number of city candidates at the time who had botched their petitions, although nowhere near as sloppy as my opponent in this particular case. But we had a number of issues. Giffen Winning, I was asked by the Republican Party to represent a lot of those cases. And I went to the partnership, as I did on anything that was political there, and said, is this something we want to do or something we don't want to do? For instance, I was asked to be involved in a lot of the Blagojevich firings, years before that. I took that to the partner board, and they said, no, we don't think we want to do this. And I said, that's fine. It's your business. That's, at the end of the day, you guys own it. You have to deal with it. This was one, though, that they gave me permission to do it, and we got about 10 days into it. And it's like, oh, we can't be doing this. We're catching too much heat. And I'm like, you know what? I go, I brought it to you. If you didn't want to do it, you shouldn't have done it when we started this. At the point we're representing clients, I have a problem with that. And so that led to some, it led to a situation where we basically decided to, this was probably late December, early January, and by mid-February, we decided to part ways, and I moved on and went solo.
Were you handling those cases for the Republican Party for free, or was the firm getting paid for that, or were you getting paid for that?
That's probably attorney-client privilege, and I can't discuss that.
Well, the party, if they paid you, would be on their reports.
And you can look at their reports.
We asked earlier a little bit about your judicial philosophy. I have a couple more broad questions. When it comes to interpreting the Constitution, where do you kind of fall on that? How do you interpret?
Well, I'm would be a strict constructionalist is the kind of the legal term that's used in it. On the federal level, more of an originalist, but obviously we have a 1970 Constitution in Illinois as opposed to a 1700s one at the federal level. So you have a little bit different issue there on trying to divine what the folks who put it together were really meaning. And of course, in the case of Illinois, you have a situation where there was a great deal of other source material and comments, testimony, that kind of stuff that went along with the Constitutional Convention, so that you can get a little more information on what Illinois was going. But I consider myself, a conservative. My personal views historically have been that of a fiscal conservative and a social conservative. Those in some ways, affect how I view particular issues. But at the end of the day, it's not the judicial branch's position to take a particular judge's views, in my opinion, and put it onto any particular case or controversy. The legislature writes the laws. They're governed by the Constitution. The precedential case law comes down from the appellate courts. That, in my opinion, is, that's what you follow. That to me, that this I don't like judges who legislate from the bench. And so whether you have a conservative or a liberal judge legislating from the bench, I think is the wrong way. I think that's the wrong role that a judge has in society. I view the judge more as an umpire who catches or, basically calls the balls and strikes on a particular case within the rules and within the law that is laid down, and tries to provide a fair tribunal for folks that come before that particular judge.
And are there any judges that you sort of admire or keep an eye on what they're doing?
I always enjoy reading Justice Scalia's opinions. I think he's always right to the point. Actually, to be honest, I always enjoyed appearing in front of Judge Zappa, whose vacancy I'm now seeking. I think he's backing my opponent, but at the end of the day, he's, I think that the general view of the courthouse was that he was always an extremely conscientious, read everything. One of the things as a practitioner when you're in the courthouse is you like to know when you're a lawyer, you go in front of a judge that they've actually read the file before they come out on the bench. I won't obviously name any judges who don't do that. I'm sure there are none in that particular county, but maybe in other counties somewhere there are judges who are not as conscientious in looking at that. But, sometimes when you walk in and you go, well, what are we here for today? Well, there's a motion that I filed 3 weeks ago, and, if you would skim it, you would at least know what we're here for today. Or say, it's always hard as the practitioner in the courtroom to say, because the judge, I had one of these not too long ago where the judge said, well, Mr. Gray, I think we're here on this for you. You should start. And I said, well, Your Honor, I hate to disagree, but I believe the other party has a dispositive motion that I think probably ought to be heard before we move on to whatever. And, oh yeah. So you have that a little bit, and that's the nature of the business. There are thousands of cases that come in front of these, but at the end of the day, I think you want a collegial atmosphere that is respectful of everybody that's there. If you ask around, you'll find folks who have found judges, I'm sure long retired, who were not very respectful of the parties that are there, or the attorneys that are there, or the fact that the attorneys are trying to represent clients who frankly do not understand a lot of how the system works. And so when a judge says something negative or cutting or belittling to an attorney that's in the courtroom when the client is there, the client starts wondering, what is that about? You see what I mean? And there are, apocryphal stories of some of that happening in other jurisdictions, and I'd hate to see that happen in Sangamon County. And we have a really good, Judge Kelly, I've been in front of him before, and he's a very good judge. And to be honest, my opponent, I probably over the last year or so probably have spent more time in Judge Madonia's courtroom than I have anything else, just because I've had a couple cases that have come up a few times. And so that is not really that's not really so much the issue. The issue here is we have a situation where unexpectedly we have a judicial race that has gone to the ballot, which almost never goes to the ballot in this jurisdiction. And I just happen to represent 15 counties, 5 of which are in this judicial district. I have for 15 years. I'm a little bit older than my opponent, got a little more education than my opponent. He's got a little more time on the bench than I do. In the end, you have to decide, do you want another Republican on the bench to represent the area?
Should any change be made in how money is raised? Should there be like a public financing for judges? Because right now, many attorneys donate to judicial candidates, stuff like that. Is that a problem? What can be done about it? Or nothing?
Well, and it's very interesting. I've never been involved in a race where I couldn't call anybody and ask for money. And that's one of the major rules, is you can't, as a judicial candidate or a judge, you cannot solicit funds, even if, for instance, I've known Judge Zappa for many years, and Judge Zappa was always on the United Cerebral Palsy Board, and my wife worked there for a number of years, and so, but he could be involved and say, we're going to have a dinner, but he couldn't be the person he couldn't be listed on the invite, he couldn't be the person soliciting money. And of course, I have a long history of being a pretty active fundraiser for the Republican Party, and I have people go, well, what if I sent you money? And I go, talk to my dad. It's our, that kind of stuff.
Treasurer for this?
Yeah. So I mean, it's just very unusual in that sense. But those really aren't that's not really the state rules. That's the model American Bar Association rules that have kind of come down and been adopted by most of the states. And so it's a little unusual that way. Generally, I think I like elected judicial races. I mean, at the end of the day, there's probably some bad decisions made, some good decisions made, but at the end of the day, I'm more of a small d Democrat in the sense that the average voter out there, if they want to take the time to learn about judicial candidates and vote for them and put them into office, that really is their right as voters. I don't know that I would be a big fan of merit selection of judges. One thing about judicial things tend to get a little insular in the judicial world. You might notice that, as I mentioned before, everybody's just been appointed for the last 20-some years in this area. And I was surprised. I've gotten a lot of calls from attorneys, some of whom I wouldn't ever have thought are necessarily my friends, or I don't know them all that well or whatever, and some of them, frankly, who are Democrats. And they've really said, we like the fact that you are mixing things up. I mean, that is something different.
But what about any kind of public financing of campaigns? Is that in the realm?
I leave that. I mean, that's the legislature's decision to decide that. I don't. If I was running for that type of office, I wouldn't say I'd be for public financing of elections. But I don't think the judges, in the end of the day, have any, really any input to the legislature or any ability to change how that's done.
And this might be my last question, but there's a new law in Illinois that parental notification in the case of abortion for if you're, I think it's under 17, might be 17 under, but there's judicial bypass. What would be your thought process in a case where you would allow the procedure to go forward without parental knowledge?
I haven't read that law, so I don't know. I don't think that's, because that, again, would impinge on a potential case or controversy. That's really something that might come before the court. I personally am pro-life, but again, I don't think it's the judge's job to impose that on the parties that are before them. The law is the law, and it should apply to everybody equally, regardless whether you're in front of a pro-choice or pro-life judge, in my opinion. But I'm sure the law will lay out the situations where that is most appropriate. I will tell you, though, it's kind of an interesting history, though. The medical community was very much against me, or against Amy and I having our second child because of the cystic fibrosis thing. And so that was a pretty major issue to decide. In other words, well, we can go in, we can do an in utero, we can find out, and you can take care of it. Is there a risk to that? And, oh yeah, there's a 2 or 3% risk of the in utero to the baby that could cause problems or whatever. And what we decided was, no matter what our baby was going to be, we were going to have it. So I have the risk.
And how old is that child now?
4.5.
So this question gets into a couple of things. Once elected, will you continue on the board?
Probably not. There is some language that talks about educational in the ABA rules, as far as, for instance, one of the few things that judges can do is teach in a university or school setting. So in general, judges can't really have any outside employment, except that one of the big exemptions is the educational side of things. And there's some language that suggests that on the Lincoln Land deal. But to be honest, I've been on Lincoln Land for 15 years. Much of what I ever wanted to get done at Lincoln Land, we've been able to successfully do. I think Lincoln Land is in fantastic shape. I'm very proud of the work that's been done there, and probably I would go focus on what I want to do, now with my career, and let somebody else take up the torch out at Lincoln Land.
And then I read in both the Blue Mound Leader and the Springfield Journal Register your letter to the editor, and I suspect it was in other publications throughout the several counties, about your role in the policy about the arms. I'm not so much concerned about the weapons. Well, I am, but at a different level. I guess my concern was in the absence of any reporting, was all of that done by your sense of the Open Meetings Act? I mean, was there open meeting discussion about whether or not this should be the policy at Lincoln Land?
Yeah, I mean, we considered it. So any of our policies at Lincoln Land are on the agenda one meeting, not voted on, and then they come up at a subsequent meeting. We never pass anything. We may have passed something emergency in the last 10 years, but
Sure.
One or two things. But generally, our policy thing is that we bring it up at one meeting, have the discussion there, and then, then have the ability to get comment from constituents, whatever it is, and then it comes up before the next meeting. Those were all done in open session. As far as
I mean, was there open, active, vigorous
no,
rigorous
not I mean.
debate about that, or would that just kind of sail through?
Well, so, under the Open Meetings Act, any of us, it depends on the size of the board, but in the case of the Lincoln Land Board, where you have 7 elected members and an 8th student member,
Right.
any two of us can talk amongst ourselves.
Right.
And that's the way that the vast majority of boards work, in the sense that if you're going to lobby folks on a particular issue, that's the way you do it. We have been very, very, and I teach Open Meeting Act issue and Freedom of Information Act issue as a lawyer, and I have for a long time. In fact, I just got a distinguished faculty bug for my website this last few months for the teaching that I've been able to do that with Don Craven and John Myers. It's kind of a fun group of us fighting that fight. So I am very much in favor of sunshine laws, and I've always followed that. But this was a particular issue. We get news clips from around the state, from the Trustees Association. And so there was an article that came in from Moraine Valley Community College up in the Chicago area, and it was a trustee, and it was the president, and it was their local chief of police, and everybody was basically like, we need to figure out how to make it as unwelcoming on campus, as difficult on campus for when the concealed carry permit holders finally come online after the beginning of the new year. And we ought to have them, make them park all the way out in the corner of the parking lot, and we ought to have them, if they get a concealed carry permit, they're going to have to register with the police department at the college if they're a student, so that the police department knows everybody who's got that. Oh, and you won't be able to just come to campus and leave your firearm in a locked case under the state law, which all the requirements are spelled out. You will have to meet with a campus police officer, so you'd just be sitting out there waiting for them to show up at some point to deal with that issue. These were like 3 of the big issues that came out in it. And when I saw that article, this was back in August, so this is long before the judicial race ever came. I didn't think there was going to be a judicial race, to be honest. I sent that on to the president and I think Chairman Reichert at the time, and I said, I'll be honest with you, we're downstate. I am comfortable that the bipartisan group that put together the rules and regulations and the law on concealed carry, with 16 hours of training, very intensive background check, the people who are going to have concealed carry in Illinois worry me a lot less than a lot of other people that are out on the streets. And frankly, a lot of other states have either very little training or really very little type of issue. And my argument was, we should be as welcoming as possible, in the sense that we should abide by the state law. So you still can't take any of that inside a building. You can't take it out of the sporting events. You can't do any of that. The law prohibits all of that. But I didn't want us to go down the line, which, John, let's face it, the average academic is probably not real pro concealed carry. Of anybody who was, whether you're at Lincoln Land Community College or UIS or U of I or Moraine Valley. And my argument was, let's not go down the pike where we start dreaming up all these ways that we can be more restrictive. Let's follow the state law. That a lot of thought was put into that. I mean, it rattled around for a long time. And now, that being said, anybody who violates the law and takes a firearm into the building or whatever, they're going to find themselves in a world of hurt. But probably not in front of my court, because I'd have to recuse myself.
I'm not so much interested in the policy.
Just the open meetings?
Open meetings and open, rigorous debate about that in full public view.
And I don't know that there really wasn't that much debate. It was basically me, I don't know, it was kind of me basically sending as I talked to people, and I didn't even talk to everybody on the board. I probably just talked to Justin Reichert and President Warren and maybe one other. But basically I said, this is my view on this, and I'm hopeful this is where we'll end up, and that's where the policy ended up going, and that's the policy we ended up adopting. So, but certainly no off-campus meetings or groups of the college talking about it. No, we've never done that.
Yeah, I mean, given the lack of openness in most discussions in the city and everywhere else around here, it just seems like that'd be a chance to really have a good one.
Yeah, and I've long been an advocate for open. I think the sunshine laws are there for a reason, and it always amazes me the city of Springfield just doesn't believe that anybody apparently is mature enough to understand what's going on in a given day. And at the end of the day, most of that stuff I think can get out without any damage to anybody.
Right.
So I'm an advocate from that side of things. I mean, if there was anything that happened in that discussion, I wasn't involved in it in Lincoln Land.
And I guess the suggestion is the implications as a judge, as those kind of cases would come forward.
Well, I mean, I think the law is fairly well settled. You know, that, I mean, you know, there are, as a municipal lawyer, I do a lot of, I mean, there have been situations where I have denied, as the lawyer for the FOIA person, I have denied stuff that I thought, you know, we don't want to give out social security numbers for a person. We don't, you know, if it's a police report, we don't want to give out driver's license numbers and cell phone numbers and a lot of other issues. We've had situations where we've had witnesses in domestic violence issues where, you know, where I've thought it'd probably be the better, you know, we could release everything. I mean, I think what the average person doesn't understand, you can release whatever you want. It's only whether you choose to use those exemptions to employ them on what you want to do. But there's a time to do that, in my opinion, and there's a time not to. And I've at least in my, you know, my practice of law and being a member of a board, my general view is most things are better out in public, and the story gets better told, in my opinion, that way. We had that at Lincoln Land when I first came on the board, and I really wasn't on the board yet, but it was when a previous president was departing. And you had the previous president, frankly, that was out publicly very vocal about what was going on, and you had a board that, well, we can't talk about that, we can't talk about that, we can't talk about that. At the end of the day, I think it helps the voters and the taxpayers to have a discussion about some of those issues, whether it's employee issues or whatever it might be.
What municipalities do you represent?
Over the years, I've represented 9. Right now, I represent Southern View and Illiopolis.
I think we have hit our 45 minutes, so.
I don't even know what time it is. It's been so much fun, Jayette, that I didn't even wear a watch, so I wouldn't pull the George H.W. Bush thing of, you know, going, when am I getting out of here?
Is there anything you'd want to say in closing about?
Just, I appreciate the opportunity to come before you for the editorial board. I think, you know, I think this is an important position. I think it's a unique opportunity to have a primary race for a judge, which, I mean, we haven't had a contested judge race of any serious nature for decades, and to have a primary in one is even more unusual. So I would encourage
Can I
voters
give him a chance to say one more thing?
Mm-hmm.
Because you've talked to me since I did the column about the strong language in your objection to Mr. Judge Madonia's petitions. You basically say that's boilerplate, although I don't know if you had to use such tough language.
Well,
it's disregarding rules of law.
There's so the, you know, I had a couple people, well, you know, Bernie said you use tough words on that, and I go, well, it was the last objection, and it basically says, you know, there's a standard Illinois Institute of Continuing Legal Education book that deals with election law that has, and here's a dirty little secret of law, everybody. Most lawyers look for forms or cases or stuff where somebody has already tread that path, and we try to follow that. Not every lawyer dreams everything up that's written on their own. And so there is a kind of a standard form in there on objections on how you lay it out. And the reason is, you know, all these boards see the same thing. So you don't want to be the outlier that yours is so much different than everybody else's. And on issues of the affidavit issue and just a lot of objections, there are several cases which were cited in that. And I think, Bernie, what you put in the thing was, you know, Kent Gray said the following, and that's kind of harsh. The reality is that's what the justices said in the appellate court decisions that were in quotes that were in so it said, you know, you shouldn't have this, or this, and that's from this particular case. And I think there's a perfect example when I think some people thought, boy, Kent's being real harsh. I really wasn't being all that harsh. I was actually just quoting kind of the seminal cases on those particular issues from the appellate court.